Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malphurs Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and A.J. Mathieu.
Welcome back to the Church Revitalization Podcast. We're happy to have you this week on episode 46. As always, I am here with Scott Ball. Welcome, Scott.
Thanks, AJ. Glad to be here. Glad to be on episode 46, talking about a topic that is maybe under-examined.
Possibly under-examined. Well, then it's a good topic for us to be talking about this week then. And the title is Maximizing Your Team. And this is something that we're certainly passionate about here at the Malphurs Group. And Aubrey Malphurs has written lots about leadership and team building. And so, this is something that I guess we talk about with some regularity, at least with the churches that we work with. And we've had a lot of varying episodes on leadership and teams. But I think this is a really great little 5-point list that you've put together for us this week, Scott.
Yeah, I think this is a really critical topic. One of the questions that we will often get before we work with the church is, what is the difference between success and failure in a revitalization process? And it really boils down, in my opinion, to two things. And maybe you've got a different take on this, AJ, but one is the continuing to meet. That's sort of the most fundamental thing. For the churches that continue to meet, they continue to have success because, if you quit meeting, then you quit doing the things that you kind of have to show up to the meeting and explain what it is that you've gotten done. But it really goes beyond just the meetings, if we're completely honest, because you can continue to meet and those meetings be really ineffective.
Yeah.
And you can just get together once a month and go, what'd you get done? Nothing. What'd you get done? Nothing. And go, well, hopefully we'll do better next time, and that's not particularly helpful either. So the second key component there is really leadership and leading teams. And that's what this topic is all about, is how do you get the most out of your team? A lot of guys, a lot of pastors that we're talking with, maybe they're in a smaller church, AJ, and they don't have a big staff that they're leading. And so when they're leading a revitalization team, it's the first time they've really had to lead a team like this. And so whether you are in a larger church and you've got a larger staff and you've got a staff team, or you're in a smaller church leading a revitalization team, I think these 5 points kind of transfer regardless of the context of the team you're leading.
Let's jump in. Number one, Scott, that you've got down here is defining the next win for the big goal. So we have two components here: next win and big goal. So what are the differences in those two, and what are we really talking about?
Right. So you can think about a big goal in a couple of different contexts. One would be whatever that sort of 5-year vision is that you have, and you say, this is the church that we want to become. This is the organization that we want to be. This is what we want that to look like. And certainly everything that you do ought to be driving you towards painting that picture. Maybe on a more concrete level, you could be thinking about, what is it that we're trying to accomplish this year? So where are the areas that we're trying to improve? Certainly when we're working with a church, we're going to help them narrow down to 3 to 5 projects that they're working on in a given year. So the big goal might be one of those 5 big projects that they're working on. So there is a little bit of wiggle room on what I mean by big goal. Certainly, ultimately, that larger vision, but then also that specific thing that you're working on that year. When we talk about the next win, we mean, what is the next most important thing for you to get done? So let's just take an example that we can maybe track, AJ, throughout the course of this podcast.
Okay.
Something that might resonate. A lot of churches right now are not doing children's ministry yet for a variety of reasons. And everyone's going to have their own reasons why children's ministry isn't open yet. But let's just pretend for this podcast that the next win for your church is to get children's ministry open. So you need to define that for the team and say, hey, I know I'm working with a church right now. They've got new video equipment. And so I know that they're kind of trying to finesse the mechanics of installing that equipment and getting used to that equipment. But if the leader of that church, the senior pastor of that church, says, hey, the most important win for us next is getting children's ministry open, then what that means for them is they're going to have to just get that video equipment operational, not worrying about how to learn all of its bells and whistles, and sort of an all hands thing to try and help the children's ministry get ready so they can open. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You're deciding for the team collectively. Doesn't mean everybody doesn't have a little bit of their own stuff to do, but for the team as a whole, what is our next win towards the big goal?
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So for future listeners, let's make sure that our context is okay here. This is July 2020, mid-COVID. So if you're watching this in 2025 and saying, why would children's ministry have not been open? There you go.
You can remember. Yeah. Back to these
read
days.
The old news about what happened. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
All right, man, that's really good. So let's move on to number 2. We've got determine the critical pathway. So we've got to be able to take this this next win and break it down into how are we going to do this. And let's also mention that your time frame is going to vary. Maybe your team meets weekly, maybe it meets monthly, or some other variation. So the context of what the next win is in between whatever the meeting distance is that you have in your church.
Right. So we talk about determine the critical pathway. Let's first start with the underlying wrong assumption, which is that every week is the same, right? People think my job, if you, even if you work in some widget factory making widgets, not every day is exactly the same. You have times where sales are coming in and you got to build even more widgets than normal. You've got other times where maybe sales are down and you got to build fewer widgets and you got to do maintenance, or it's this season or that. Like there's an assumption, I think, that a lot of people have in ministry in particular, where every week is the same. We just got to kind of keep things moving and producing this week to week, make Sunday happen, make Wednesday happen, make things happen. And that's not real life. The reality is that your job is dynamic and the work is dynamic and ministry is dynamic, and to not meet with that awareness that things are fluid and dynamic is to have a missed opportunity for leadership. So if we start with the assumption that we're going to define what the next win is, so sort of above and beyond your normal things that you have to get done, there is something that's most important for us to work on as a team. Then the next thing I have to do as a leader is say, okay, what is the critical pathway? So when we were in the middle of, was working with working on staff at a church, we were building a facility. One of the things when you work with a contractor, they talk about, here's the critical path. It's talking about what are the things that we have to work on right now. So you start saying, well, going back to our example of getting children's ministry open, well, we're going to do the minimal amount that we need to do on the video stuff so that we can focus on children's ministry. Don't let the children's ministry get distracted, going through all the old closets and cleaning stuff out. Like that is not the thing that's between them, between now and them opening, right? That's a luxury project to work on when they have the time and flexibility to work on it. So as a leader, it's your goal to say, here are the 5 things we need to get done this week. This is the critical path. This is the critical pathway for us to get from where we are right now to where we need to be. So you as a leader need to define what that is and collaborate with your team to define what that is if you don't know. And get everybody on the same page for which steps, action steps, tasks need to get done this week so that we can accomplish that next win.
I would expect a lot of people listening probably feel, and it's not, there's nothing wrong with feeling this way, that their week is pretty well full every week. And we'll talk more about this here in our next point. But also going into this, determining a critical pathway, knowing that every single week, likely in your position, something has come up that you weren't expecting on Monday, but by Friday it had to be addressed, and you got it done. You were able to fit it in there. And so we're really talking about building in things that need to be done and making sure that critical pathway is laid out. And the time is there because you're able to handle those other things that pop up. So Monday doesn't determine Friday, most likely in your environment either. But you can help determine Monday through Friday whenever you lay things out in a kind of more of an orderly fashion and plan to accomplish what needs to be accomplished to reach that big goal.
I'm trying to think of a good way to say this, AJ. It's a little bit like trying to determine before you go into your Tuesday morning staff meeting. It's almost like you want to project out what do you want to next Tuesday's staff meeting to look like.
Oh yeah.
right? You're kind of saying, all right, if I want next Tuesday's, when we get to number 5 here, when we talk about celebrating progress, I don't want to jump ahead, but if you want to say, this is the progress I want to celebrate, I got to reverse engineer the week. And again, this is not rocket science, but this is not how most churches operate, and it's not how most staff meetings operate. I've sat in hundreds, literally hundreds of staff meetings in my ministry career, and most of them are essentially just a report back of what last week looked like. And I'm suggesting, rather than it just be a report of what I did, which I cannot change, it's the past, using your meeting times to be project forward about where we're going, rather than a rehash of what's already been done. Not that you, and again, we'll talk about this with number 5, not that you shouldn't talk about what's been done, but there's very little to be gained by spending the majority of your time talking about things that have already happened.
I love what you just said about reverse engineering your week. If today I plan what accomplishments do I want to be able to talk about in next week's meeting, and then work backwards from there so that I'm going to accomplish that this week. I think that's a great way of looking at it.
Yeah. No, thank you. I think it would be helpful if we all did this, right?
Right. Yeah, well, sidebar.
Yeah,
we're not
thanks.
able to do this ourselves.
Thanks, AJ. I do think that is pretty smart.
We struggle with this just like you do. So, yeah. All right, man, let's move on. Number 3, pruning away the waste from your schedule. So this is a close relative to number 2 about defining that critical pathway, but getting rid of the things that may be just occupying time and not being things that are progressing you towards that goal.
Right. So number 2 is more about sort of being proactive about building the future you want to see, right? Like these are the, here are the 5 things I need to get done this week, or here are the 10 things as a team we need to accomplish. And, this person's going to do this and this person's going to do that, and it's going to be done by this time or whatever. It's more about mapping out. This one, prune away the waste from your schedule, is different. It's about taking things off of the task list, taking things off of what you're planning to do.
Mm-hmm.
So Greg McKeown has this great quote in his book, Essentialism, if you've ever read the book. It's a worth read if you haven't. He says, you cannot underestimate the unimportance of practically everything. And I think it's really true.
Yeah.
Like, how many things in a week do you think, man, it's really important that I get this done today, that if you didn't do it, it really wouldn't make a difference? And the reason why you know that that's true is because there are times where you just don't have the motivation to get something done, and the world didn't burn when you waited till the next day to do it. So that shows you a lot of times we think something's important, or we think that people are like waiting with bated breath for X or Y to happen. And lots of times no one really cares.
Yeah.
And so this is not something you necessarily have to do every week. In fact, it could be a just really exhausting, draining thing if you did it every week, but maybe once a month or once a quarter or something, kind of map out your week. This is something you normally do in conjunction with someone else. Like I might sit down and say, hey, AJ, write out to me, what does a typical week look like for you Monday through Friday? I know everything is different from week to week, but just, on a typical week. And then we sit down there, look together and go, all right, what's 20% of stuff that you're doing that's really just a complete waste of time, or that you could delegate, or that doesn't need to be done at all? And try to create some margin so that you have more time to focus on the critical pathway that we are working on together as a team.
Yeah. Yep. That's good. For me personally, also, a lot of times I like to get done the hardest things first, or the things I'm least interested about doing first, because it just kind of builds you up then, you have like increased personal momentum just to keep going. So,
right.
Yeah, that's a good one, man. Okay. Number 4, we're talking about managing the minutia.
Yeah. So once you kind of look at your schedule and go, all right, here are all the things I have to get done. And then you maybe have identified some things that you just don't really even need to do, or you could delegate to somebody else, or do it a different way so that it's not on your schedule every week. There is still going to be sort of a pot of things that you have to do that is not exactly fun or exciting or interesting. Mm-hmm. These are, returning emails, voicemails, for me, it's like whenever I have to do an expense report for something, AJ knows I hate doing that. I hate sending invoices for things to AJ. Like there are things, anything that has to do with money, I pretty much don't ever want to have to do it. There's a little insight into me. I don't know what that says about my psychology, but I just pretty much don't ever want to do it. But we all have these things that we have to do.
Yeah.
That are not necessarily the most meaningful things, but that they're not unimportant either. They have to get done.
Mm-hmm.
So the best way to manage that minutia, and again, this is not rocket science, but it's still something that most people don't do, is to constrict that minutia to a very narrow window of time.
Right.
So say, I'm only going to answer email from 9 to 11, or I'm only, or whatever that block of time is. Generally, it's sometimes better to split it up, because you don't want to be get an email at 11:01 and be like, well, I'm not answering that till tomorrow. So maybe you've got an hour in the morning and an hour in the afternoon that you're working on those things.
Mm-hmm.
Apply this to your own context in a way that works for you. But if you were to constrict the things that don't matter very much into narrow windows of time, you'll be surprised you can get it done in that window of time. Work generally expands and contracts to the amount of time that you dedicate to it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you constrict yourself to those narrow periods of time to do the minutia, you'll generally get it done.
Yeah, that's good. And again, going back to that little tip that I just threw in a minute ago, maybe that, that weekly report that you have to do, or something that you just never look forward to, get it done early in the day or early in the week, and have it behind you, and you're likely going to increase your own personal productivity.
Or you could take the complete opposite approach and be like, I'm going to do it on Friday. And then you can go into your weekend feeling like, man, so accomplished.
Your reward. I'm doing the 4 o'clock on Friday. I will do that.
Right. But then you go into the weekend being like, oh my goodness, I feel like a burden is lifted off of me. And I've been so productive.
All right,
whatever works for you.
Before we get into number 5, here's a quick recap. So number 1 was define the next win to the big goal. So that whatever happens in whatever, your time frame is between meetings, have something that will be accomplished that will move you down the field. Number 2 is determine the critical pathway. So putting together the things throughout that week or 2-week period or month-long period or whatever it is, that step-by-step pathway that's going to get you to that goal. Number 3, prune away the waste from your schedule. We all have it, and it'll be worth your time to take the time to investigate that in your context. And then finally, manage the minutia was our 4th point here, to make sure that you get the things done that you don't like to do but have to get done, and make sure that they don't overcrowd the more important tasks that are going to really move you near the goal line. All right, number 5 is the best one. Gladys, number 5, celebrate the progress. So we get to smile and pat ourselves on the back.
Yeah, you cannot underestimate how important this is. I may have told this story, I think, maybe in a different episode sometime. So for those of you who are like religious listeners, I apologize if this is a repeat story for you, but it's a really great analogy, I think, for how this stuff works. So when I was in high school, I one time went to, actually, I think I did this maybe more than once, but we went to the Great Sand Dune National Park. You've been there, AJ?
I have.
It's weird. If you've never been there, it's surrounded by mountains. It's beautiful, but it's like a sea of dirt, just miles and miles and miles of sand dunes.
Beach with no ocean.
That's right. But the sand dunes are not like the ones at the beach. They're massive.
They're huge. Yeah,
they're huge, and it is no small accomplishment to get to the top of the first one, because the first one is really high, and then from there it kind of rolls along. But so most people who go and visit Great Sand Dune National Park, they're only ever climbing the first sand dune because they want to get to the top of it to kind of get this nice view and whatever. At any rate, and we were only there for maybe an hour. It was just a break to stretch our legs and whatnot. But before we had gone, it was a hot day. We had stopped at a 7-Eleven or something to pick up, a drink. I had gotten myself a Powerade or a Gatorade or something with a twist top, like squirt bottle twist top. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. So it was really hot. It's like insanely hot. It's like, it feels like 175 degrees outside. And I wanted to get to the top of this sand dune. That was my next win, right? or that was my big goal, was to get to the top of the sand dune. So what I would do is I would take a sip of that Powerade, and then I would throw the Powerade a little bit further up the sand dune. So that's the next win, right? So then I'm panting, I'm crawling on, all fours to get to the thing, grab it, and then would I just throw it right up? No, you
No.
take a sip. You
Have a sip.
celebrate that
Yeah.
you made it there. Squirt a little Powerade, close that thing up, throw it a little bit further up the sand dune, crawl, make your way up. AJ's laughing a little bit because he knows how much I hate the outside. So he's probably can imagine.
You're exactly right.
Imagine me being covered in sand and being like, it's so hot. But this is how I made it to the top, right? So I finally get to the top, and then you obviously feel so good. So the challenge here is that churches, lots of times, they don't celebrate the win until they make it all the way to the top. But there is 7 different stages between here and there for you to get discouraged and give up. You have to celebrate every major step along the way. So take a little sip, whatever that looks like in your meetings, to celebrate the progress that you made, not so that you can get comfortable and stay there, but so that you can throw that Powerade bottle up, a few more steps and make it further and further all the way up to the top, so you can finally get to that big win, that vista, celebrate. You did it in 195 million degrees, and you snap the photo, and then you get off that thing and get back in the van and the air conditioning. But that's how you do it. And it's so important. Churches are not great at doing this. They don't celebrate their progress. They don't acknowledge where they're at until they're all the way there. And most churches give up on their goals and their projects before they ever get to the top.
Yeah. Yep. Well, man, thanks for this topic this week. This is really good. And I hope that our, leaders that are listening right now are thinking to themselves, how could I handle meetings differently now, and encourage your team to be able to make these, these small goals, these intermediate wins. One thing you could do is pass this podcast or video on to the rest of your team. So
Right.
You guys can talk about it then in next week's meeting, so that you can make this plan together.
That's right. Well, and just sort of a follow-up to that really fast before we close. A lot of leaders, I think, are afraid of being micromanagers. But if you leverage your meeting time really well to define where it is we're going, who's going to do what and when, make sure we're not wasting time on anything that doesn't matter, and celebrating our progress along the way, then you don't have to micromanage. If you have to micromanage, it's a sign that you're actually really terrible at running meetings.
Yeah.
So meetings matter. And if you run good ones, you don't have to micromanage. So if you can do these 5 things, though, you'll run really effective meetings and you'll get the most out of your team.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Scott. And thanks to all of you for listening or watching this week on the Church Revitalization Podcast, episode 46. We'll be looking forward to having you back again next week when we've got some fresh topics for you, and praying that it'll be a blessing to your ministry. If you would like to get in touch with us, you can always email us at leadership@malfersgroup.com or visit us on our website at malfersgroup.com for more information about how we help churches become effective disciple makers. Until next week, thanks so much. God bless you.